On August 14th, 12 Navy SEALs descended beneath Los Angeles for a counter-terrorism sweep. 11 of them never came back up. The one who did hasn't spoken a word since, except to ask why JSOC already knew what was waiting for them. The briefing had been unusually sparse. Conor Durham had run enough black site operations to know when a mission packet was engineered to conceal rather than inform. The stated objective was infrastructure, security, counterterrorism posture, assessment of the service tunnel network beneath the SoFi Stadium complex. The actual packet was 17 pages thinner than standard. Durham noticed. He said nothing. He led his team to the insertion point anyway, because that was the job, and because SEAL Team 9 Detachment Grey Water didn't get asked twice. The 6 of them entered at 2:17 through a maintenance access point in the drainage basin off Century Boulevard. Durham on point, Clark Fisher 2 steps back and left. Amelia Barlow running comes mid-column. Moses Acosta covering the medical kit and watching the ceiling out of old habit. Evie Sargent locked on rear security, and Damian Neal, the only non-shooter in the stack, wedged between Barlow and Acosta, with his field terminal open, and his face already doing the thing it did when the numbers didn't match. The tunnel was 8 meters wide, 4 meters high, and absolutely silent, in a way that no tunnel under a city of 4 million people should ever be silent. Fisher found the first anomaly within 6 minutes. The remains of ALAPD infrastructure patrol kit, radio flashlight housing, body camera chassis lay in a neat cluster against the eastern wall, not scattered, arranged. The body camera's polycarbonate casing had been compressed from both sides, simultaneously with a force that the team's field assessment put at over 800 kilograms per square centimeter. Nothing mechanical did that, Fisher said, kneeling over it. Nothing in this tunnel, Durham answered, and moved the column forward. Barlow broke contact protocol 6 minutes later. Durham. I'm picking up signal traffic on the tactical frequency. It's not voice. It's not data burst. She isolated it through her earpiece, held one finger up, and the column stopped. The signal was a rhythm, a pattern of short and long pulses, 17 distinct beats, then silence, then repeat. It wasn't random. Neil Cross referenced it against known biological signal signatures in his field database in under 90 seconds. He looked up at Durham with an expression that belonged on a man who had just been asked to do math that had no answer. It's bioluminescent frequency modulation, he said quietly. Something is using light pulses to transmit coded information. And it's close. They moved into the secondary tunnel grid, the pre-war drainage infrastructure that predated the modern city's construction by nearly 40 years. Down here, the concrete was older, rougher, stained dark with decades of moisture. The emergency lighting strips gave way to nothing. Durham's team engaged GPN, VG-18s, and the world went green, white, and flat. That was when Sargent, on rear security, said 3 words over the internal channel that changed the thermal register of the entire mission. Contact. Not moving. Durham turned. In his 4-tube NVG display, at the far end of the passage they'd just cleared, something stood perfectly still against the wall. It was tall. It was watching them, and its eyes were amber, bioluminescent, slow-pulsing amber, in a spectrum that the GPN VG-18 was not designed to detect at all. The pulse rate of those eyes was not irregular. It was deliberate. Neil counted 12 beats. Pause. 7 beats. Pause. 4 beats. Durham, he said, his voice pitched completely flat. That's a command structure. 1274 is a military call sign format. Durham stared at the thing at the end of the tunnel. It had not moved. It had not attacked. It was transmitting. The realization hit the team at the same moment. They had not surprised anything. They had been received. Durham called a tactical halt. 6 operators in a tunnel with no exit geometry behind them. One entity of unknown mass, visible at a range of 40 meters, that had not moved in 4 minutes. And a Sargent analyst telling them the blinking of its eyes was structured military communication. The mission protocol for anomalous contact was to withdraw to the insertion point and relay. Durham opened the command channel to JSOC liaison. The channel returned static, not dead static. Shaped static, Barlow said, her voice careful. Somebody on the other side of that frequency was actively maintaining the interference. Fisher ran the numbers on the compression damage to the LAPD equipment. He had been doing it quietly in the back of his mind since the first find. He said it now because he thought they needed to hear it. For that kind of bilateral compression, at that tolerance, you'd need 2 anchor points, separated by at least 60 centimeters, and a grip force exceeding human physical limits by a factor of 12. He paused. Each hand. That's each hand. Nobody responded. The entity at the end of the tunnel pulsed its eyes, once slow, dominant, a single long amber beat, and was gone. Not retreating. Gone. The concrete wall behind it was empty, and the sound of its departure was 0. Damian Neal pulled up the sublevel infrastructure map and cross-referenced it with the signal intercepts he'd been logging since Barlow first flagged the frequency. The pattern was not random traffic. The pulses were triangulated. 3 distinct source nodes, one ahead, one at an oblique 40 degrees to their left, one directly above, in the service channel ceiling, had been broadcasting that same 17-beat rhythm at overlapping intervals. "They've been ranging us," Neal said. "Since we entered, those signals are echolocation equivalents. They know our exact position, our column formation, and our movement speed." He showed Durham the map overlay. "We walked into a pre-designated kill zone." Durham looked at the geometry. The 3 signal nodes formed a perfect isosceles triangle, with the team at the centroid. "How long?" Durham asked. "Since the second tunnel junction," Neal said. "Approximately 11 minutes. The midpoint of the operation arrived not with an engagement, but with a sound. Moses Acosta heard it first, a voice, low and precise, coming from the eastern passage, one channel over from their current position. He recognized it immediately, and his blood went cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the tunnel temperature. It was Sargent's voice, Evie Sargent's voice, inflection perfect, calling Durham's call sign and issuing a repositioning order. Move the column east, consolidate on her position. She had eyes on a command node. Sargent was standing 2 meters to Durham's left. She had not said a word. The voice from the eastern passage was using her radio signature, her vocal cadence, and an order format that matched her communication style exactly. "Don't move," Durham said on the internal channel. "Nobody move." The voice from the east repeated the order, patient, precise, slightly warmer this time. "Laryngeal mimicry," Neal said. It listened to her long enough to reconstruct her voice from acoustic memory. "It's trying to separate the column." They reversed course toward the insertion point at double time. Fisher breached the eastern passage seal with a shaped charge to open a secondary route. The original path registered as compromised on Neal's signal overlay. They moved fast and quiet. Sargent walking backward, MK-13 up, watching the darkness behind them fill with something that wasn't darkness at all. The amber pulses were multiplying. Not one pair of eyes in the tunnel now. 7 positioned, at different elevations. 2, at floor level, 2 mid-wall on the left, 1 above the right, lateral beam, 2 at the juncture ahead. The pack was not chasing them, it was repositioning around them. There was a difference, and the team understood it. They reached the junction to the Cold War era infrastructure, the oldest section of the sublevel network, predating the city's expansion grid by 4 decades. The door was a vault-weight steel blast panel, original 1950s construction, undamaged. Durham ran the breach calculation. Fisher said he could cut it in 8 minutes with the thermal lance. Behind the column, the amber pulses had gone still. Every pair of eyes in the tunnel had stopped moving simultaneously. The silence was absolute. "Why did they stop?" Acosta said. Nobody answered him. Durham looked at the vault door. Then he looked at the tunnel behind them. Then he understood, in the way that experienced operators understand things, not through analysis, but through the accumulated pattern recognition of too many years in dark places, that the pack hadn't stopped because they were retreating. They'd stopped because something else was coming. Something that required them to be still. Fisher cut the vault door in 6 minutes and 12 seconds, not 8. The thermal lance burned white-hot in the green-white NVG display, and nobody watched the tunnel, because watching the tunnel meant confirming what was back there. The panel swung inward. The chamber beyond was enormous, a Cold War-era command bunker, 40 meters across, concrete walls 2 meters thick, ceiling vaulted at 6 meters. The original military infrastructure was still present. Defunct cable routing panels, corroded relay banks, the ghost architecture of a communications nerve center that had been classified and then forgotten. But it wasn't empty. The amber nodes along the chamber walls numbered in the dozens. Not eyes, bioluminescent patches on the walls. Biological secretion residue, Neil identified, hardened into the concrete surface, over what his field spectrometer estimated as decades of continuous habitation. This chamber had been occupied for a very long time. They found 4 of the other 6 operators here. The discovery was made by Acosta first, who nearly stepped over what he initially registered as equipment bundles stacked against the north wall. They were alive, unconscious, positioned with deliberate care on their sides, airways clear, gear intact, weapons holstered. Not casualties of an engagement, not trophies. Staged for recovery. Durham stood over them for 3 full seconds trying to understand the logic of what he was seeing, and the logic would not come. It didn't kill them, Fisher said. It could have. It didn't. Barlow was already checking vitals. Pulse strong, respiration normal, pupils responsive. Whatever had been done to them had left no external mark. The chamber's bioluminescent patches began to pulse in a new pattern, coordinated, symmetrical, moving in a slow directional wave from north to south, along both walls simultaneously. Neil watched it for 45 seconds before he spoke. His voice had the quality of a man reporting something he had decided. He would commit to the record regardless of what it cost him professionally. The chamber's fiber optic conduit runs directly beneath this floor, he said. I mapped it against the city infrastructure overlay before we lost signal. This bunker sits at the junction of 3 major subgrid telecommunications arteries. The electromagnetic output from those lines is measurable as ambient field radiation. He looked up at the walls. These patches aren't decorative, they're receptive. This whole chamber is a biological antenna system. They're drawing energy from the city's telecommunications grid. Nobody spoke for a long moment. How long? Durham finally asked. The secretion layer depth suggests continuous habitation for at least 60 years, Neil said. They've been here longer than the fiber optic network itself. They adapted to it as the city built around them. The psychological destabilization point arrived not as a violent revelation, but as a quiet one. Barlow had been running a passive scan of the command channel the entire time. She had been routing it through a secondary filter Neil had coded for her, stripping the shaped static layer by layer, looking for the signal underneath. She found it at 3:44. She played it for Durham without preamble. It was a JSOC liaison transmission, sent to the mission control node 47 minutes before the team's insertion. Pre-insertion, before they went in. The transmission was brief, and its content was specific. The location of the Cold War bunker, its coordinates to 8 decimal places, and a notation in the metadata that the asset already at that location would respond to passive tracking technology. Asset, Durham said. He heard his own voice, as if it belonged to someone he didn't recognize. He looked at his team, he looked at their gear. He thought about the mission packet that was 17 pages thinner than standard. He thought about which member of his team had been selected for this mission at the last minute, added to the roster 48 hours before insertion, replacing an operator who'd been pulled for medical reasons that hadn't been explained. He thought about the tracker that was standard issued for all last-minute roster additions and sewn into the lining of the equipment vest. He thought about why JSOC would need to locate something that already appeared on their classified maps. The answer, when it came, was the worst kind of answer. The kind that explained everything and made everything worse simultaneously. JSOC hadn't sent them to eliminate the pack. They'd sent them to locate the Alpha. Blue Ghost came through the vault door behind them. It did not come fast. It came with the complete unhurried certainty of something that has never, in its life, had reason to hurry. 3 meters 50 of absolute black fur. The asymmetric white sternal blaze catching Barlow's IR laser in a narrow ribbon of scattered light. Its amber eyes pulsed in the slow dominant cycle. 1 long beat, 3-second pause, 1 long beat, and the pack's amber pulses throughout the chamber, synchronized to its rhythm instantly, the way a room of instruments responds to a conductor's first downbeat. Durham raised the HK-416. Fisher raised the shotgun. Sargent acquired a firing solution and held it. Blue Ghost stopped in the center of the chamber and looked at Durham with an attention that was not aggression, and was not curiosity, and was not anything that Durham had training or language for. It looked at the team the way a scientist looks at a sample that has just confirmed a hypothesis. The engagement lasted 11 seconds. Fisher fired twice. The muzzle report was enormous in the enclosed space. Acosta threw 2 flashbangs. Sargent fired once. The pack moved through the walls, through what Durham's after-action mind would insist were solid concrete surfaces, though the structural analysis would later find no breach points, and 3 operators went down, in the confusion, overwhelmed by a contact velocity that the NVG footage, reviewed afterward, could not resolve into coherent frames. Durham did not see them taken. He saw them standing, and then he saw them not standing, and the interval between the 2 states produced no visual record. Blue Ghost did not participate in the engagement. It stood at the chamber center the entire time, and watched. Conor Durham ran. He ran with Fisher's hand on his arm, and Neil 1 step behind, and Barlow somewhere in the dark, still transmitting. He could hear her channel light. No voice, just the carrier tone, which meant she was alive and trying, and Sergeant. He did not know about Sergeant. The rear of the column was dark, and the amber pulses did not follow them to the insertion point. They stopped at the drainage basin junction. At the maintenance hatch, Fisher hit the emergency hydraulic release, and the hatch opened to the pre-dawn air of Century Boulevard, and the orange sodium light of the street above felt like being born into a world that had no relationship to the one they'd just left. Durham climbed out. Fisher climbed out. Neil climbed out with his terminal clutched to his chest. Nobody else came through the hatch. Durham stood on the asphalt in the pre-dawn, and looked at the hatch, and waited for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, and nobody else came through. The JSOC debrief team arrived in 18 minutes. They were not surprised to see 1 vehicle instead of 2. They had a medical unit with them, standard protocol for high-stress field operations. They also had, Durham noted, a signals intelligence team with spectrum analyzers already deployed, running passive collection on the drainage basin entry point, pre-positioned, waiting. Durham sat in the vehicle and looked at the equipment and thought about the transmission Barlow had intercepted, the pre-insertion coordinates, the reference to an asset, the tracker in the roster edition vest. He asked the debrief officer 1 question. He asked it quietly and without inflection, and with the particular flatness of a man who has decided that the answer will not change what he does next, but he needs to hear it said aloud anyway. He asked, "Did you know what was down there before you sent us?" The debrief officer looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "This debriefing is classified at Omega Black. Nothing discussed here leaves this vehicle." Durham understood that as an answer. He didn't speak again for 6 days. Conor Durham was released from JSOC Medical Holding 22 days after Operation Blue Ghost. His file was flagged for routine psychological review, which is standard for any operator returning from a classified engagement. The review was conducted once, by a physician whose name does not appear in the public JSOC medical registry, and was closed the same day it opened. Durham's operational status was listed as inactive, not discharged, not reassigned, inactive. The other 5 members of Detachment Grey Water remained listed as MIA in the infrastructure of a classification system that was designed specifically to make people unreachable without declaring them lost. What JSOC found when they sent their signals team into the drainage basin 2 hours after Durham's extraction has never been formally reported. What we do know from a procurement record filed under a mislabeled infrastructure budget line is that the Cold War bunker beneath the SoFi complex was sealed with military-grade concrete fill 3 weeks after the incident. 6 meters of reinforced pour. The kind of seal you use when you want something to stay exactly where it is, not eliminated, contained, and the city of Los Angeles continues to function above it, every fiber optic pulse of its telecommunications grid feeding, according to Neil's final field report, a biological antenna system that has been listening to the city's electromagnetic signature for 60 years, and has no apparent intention of stopping. 1 question was never answered in Durham's debrief, because he stopped asking questions after the first one was refused. The tracker in the last-minute additions equipment vest, the one that JSOC used to locate blue ghosts, chamber transmitted a confirmation signal at 3:51. 7 minutes after the team entered the chamber, that confirmation signal was received by JSOC liaison, and the response, JSOC sent back to the tracker, a signal that should have been a simple acknowledgement, was instead a 17-beat pulse, the same 17-beat pulse the team first intercepted on the tactical frequency when they entered the tunnel, the same rhythm Blue Ghost used to transmit coordinates to its pack. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears. Because some secrets are best left behind midnight.